Hello everyone, my name is Parthos Bansal, co-founder and CTO of ThreadCorp. Let's begin with yet simple and yet urgent reality. So compliance breaches don't usually happens because someone wants to break the rules. They happens because someone didn't understand them, forgot them, or was overwhelmed by them. Over the years in cybersecurity, one thing is has become clear: the most advanced security stack can fail because of single convincing message. That realization pushed us to focus on human risk management, not just awareness, but behavioral assessment across email, messaging, calls, or QR codes and emerging channels. So today's discussion is about how AI can strengthen and scale compliance training effectiveness, making it more adaptive, more measurable, more aligned with real world attack behavior, not just checking regulatory boxes, but genuinely reducing human risk. And with that, I am excited to be joined by three exceptional leaders who brings deep expertise in strategy, governance, risk, and security transformation. So let me first introduce Chandan Kochar, who is CCO of City of Plano. So Chandan brings close to 2 decades of experience in cybersecurity strategy, governance, risk, and security operations. So he brings deep expertise in human risk management and risk governance with a strong track record of in board level engagements, audit, third party risk, and secure digital transformation, including AI adoption. Next, we have Alexander Odo, founder and CEO at Freedom Secured IT. Alexander brings over 25 years of experience in high technology and cybersecurity, working with organizations ranging from startups to global enterprises. He's worked closely with IT leaders to implement secure, scalable solutions that drive growth while reducing operational risk. His practical outcome based focus approach brings valuable insights into how an organization can proactively manage human risk in an evolving threat landscape. And finally, we have Laura Soka, founder and GRC executive at Soka Advisory Group. So, Laura is seasoned governance, risk, and compliance leader, former SVP of Security GRC at Salesforce, where she led global programs supporting large scale growth. She specializes in transforming compliance from reactive obligation into a strategic enabler of business success. Her perspective is specifically relevant today because human risk isn't just a training challenge, it's governance, leadership, priority that shapes organization culture and decision making. So, here I am. First question to Mr. Chandan. We know that regulator expects standardization trainings across the organization, but in reality, a finance executive and frontline employee does not face the same kind of risk. So how do we use AI to tailor training based on real human risk while still keeping it compliant and defensible during the audits?
Yeah, thank you. Traditionally, we've been using the training that has been focusing on, completion rates and, scores on the quizzes, post-training sessions, right? And then, we collect those evidences, we run reports, and, some of those processes have been painful, right? Using Excel files to track and then notify those people and, escalations. It's a lot of manual and tedious activities, right? Um, I think what going forward regulators are looking for are real world signals, like lower phishing clicking rates, fewer policy exceptions, the rate at which the incidents are getting reported, fewer repeat violations. Um, I think AI can, help us connect training to those outcomes, right? Um, I think the first way, where AI can help is, by enabling, continuous measurement instead of, one annual snapshot. So we can track, ongoing risk scores, see trends by, different departments, and correlate training activities with, changes in the incident patterns, right? The question shifts from, did they complete the course to did their risky behavior actually go down, right? Second thing, how I feel that AI can help with effectiveness is by giving us predictive risk indicators. It can be used to flag things like spikes in data uploads to external AI tools, or increase in override requests or delays in acknowledging the policies. That lets compliance move from reactive responding after something goes wrong to more predictive, where we can intervene before a violation happens. Um, Third thing where AI can help is, I think AI lets us show demonstrable ROI, right, which really matters in the public sector, because we can tie better behavior to reduce incident response costs, right? Fewer public disclosure events, fewer negative, FBI audit findings, and even improvements in, overall of cyber insurance risk profile.
Mhm.
um, at that point, we are not just talking about training metrics. We are talking about governance and adding value to the public trust. So if I was to sum up everything in one line, AI lets us prove behavioral change, not just course completion.
Right. I agree with your point, Chandan. I believe the real opportunity is moving from standardization training to outcomes, where every employee doesn't feel, receive the same content every time, and but the organization achieves the consistent risk reduction, right?
Exactly, and this can be applicable in private and public sector, right? Typically, we have one standardized training module for cyber awareness. It's an annual compliance activity. Everyone, irrespective of their role, typically receives one standard training. Whereas I think AI can help, in conducting more targeted, role-specific trainings. So, for example, a librarian, their threat surface may be completely different versus someone, you know, as an investigator in police department, right? So, if we can, give customized, target, risk-based trainings, I think AI can definitely contribute in that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for your answer.
Sure.
So I have second question to Mr. Alex. So compliance is not one-time exercise. It evolves with regulatory updates and operational changes and even cultural shifts inside the organization. So how can AI continuously adjust training to reflect real-world risk while still avoiding fatigue and disengagement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as you mentioned, compliance is, a lot of companies use security awareness and training as a kind of a checkbox exercise. So there's two buckets of CISOs, those that believe training actually can reduce risk, and those who believe it's just really just a compliance exercise. So I think AI can help reduce risk because we can I think we can reduce risk by treating each person as an individual, and meeting them kind of where they are, from a training standpoint. So you can't give the same training to an entry level person who just started as opposed to someone who's been in the security team for 20 years. They've got different experience, and so what happens is the one size fits all training ends up kind of being too difficult for that entry level employee, and being too easy for that senior level security person. And so you've got to meet people where they are, and I think that's AI can play a big role in helping companies tailor it to their specific role, their department, how long they've been there, and their past experience, their past failure rates as well. Have they failed every single test you've given them? If so, maybe you need to make the test a little bit easier so that you can build up their confidence, as opposed to someone who's passed every single test. Maybe they need to be challenged a little bit so they don't view this as kind of a mundane, boring exercise that only happens, and it's just kind of a waste of their time. I think that regulators want to see a reduction in risk. they don't want to just see, that you've done the training, because we've been doing this for 30, 40 years, and still the same click rates are out there. People still keep clicking on phishing emails because the training hasn't evolved. So I think until you meet people where they are, we're going to keep getting the same results.
I agree. But what about, so let's say, to make it more, to make more aware the employees, we, conduct more and more trainings inside the organization. So it actually overwhelmed them with lots of trainings. So what do you have thoughts on this?
Well, you have to understand and respect people's time. If you've got somebody in finance, they're trying to do their work in finance and they've got deadlines. You can't ask them to say, hey, stop at what you're doing and take this 30-minute annual cybersecurity test or training. That people are just going to ignore that, or they're going to just say next until it's done. And the system will say, oh, the finance person completed their training, but they didn't learn anything because they just wanted to get through it so they could get their job done. So the training has to be bite-sized micro training moments, so that person in finance is trained for 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and then they can get back to their job. And so I think if you meet people like that and respect their time, give them some relevant training that pertains to their job. So the person in finance might get a fake invoice email. The person in sales might get a fake inbound opportunity lead, for example. Hit people with relevant training content, but make it a bite-sized moment, and make that a frequent exercise throughout the year. Make it 2 or 3 times a month, for example, but 30 seconds.
So in a nutshell, perhaps the future is not about more trainings; it's about precision training, less noise, more signal.
Mm.
Okay, so I have the next question to Ms. Laura. So we have talked about AI-powered training, but what does a good AI-driven compliance really look like on the ground? What changes should a CISO or risk leader actually see if AI-driven compliance training is working properly?
Yeah, great question. And I think aligning to what the 2 other speakers mentioned, I think the number one thing is personalized. So personalized to the user, the types of situations they may face, the risk that they would have in their particular job function, maybe the elevation of that risk based on their role, really creating personalized content. I think we now have the ability to do that with AI training. Next would be creating or measuring outcomes in a way that show whether the training is effective. So using control effectiveness, data from that control effectiveness to really understand, was the training meeting the intended outcomes, not just completion rate, as was mentioned earlier. And then last would be, really thinking about providing training in the ways that people work. So people are working in a variety of different applications today. Can we embed sort of the workflows that they're doing with the training content together, so it is sitting in the same systems and tools that people are using? This is not something they do once a year and they forget about it. It's more of like an ongoing reminder and ongoing activity based on user behavior. I think that would really start to drive more of a real-time closed loop cycle of training and then the behavior to show whether that was effective.
Right. So to addition to this, if we measure training by completion rates alone, we are measuring actually activity, not just impact.
Right.
So it gives us the chance to measure the behavior of the employees over these kind of attacks.
Exactly. Measuring the outcomes as showing the effectiveness of the training. And then, you want it to be memorable for people so that they remember this when they're facing that situation. They remember, the anecdote in the training or something, or the relevancy of it to really make the right decision.
Correct. So thank you all for your valuable insights. We have covered strategy, personalization, AI, and compliance, but I'm sure many of you are dealing with the real world challenges in your own organizations, right? So I think I'm going for the questions. Let's just open the forums for the questions in the chat box.
Yeah, so we already have the first question. I am just going to reiterate the question. It says, Panel, in your opinion, what key factors or metrics would make AI-driven compliance training more credible and trustworthy to both employees and regulators? Mr. Chandan, why don't you pick that one up?
Sorry, can you say the question one more time, please?
Sure. Panel, in your opinion, what key factors or metrics would make AI-driven compliance training more credible and trustworthy to both employees and regulators?
Yeah, I think I did mention some of that, right? Like, of course, phishing test results, how many policy overrides are being done, what departments are using lots of exceptions, what kind of risky patterns, again, it all boils down to the telemetry that you're collecting from various signals, right? And how effectively are you using those signals, right? So you can certainly define some of those metrics, right? But the point is, the compliance-based trainings are more reactive, right? You train somebody, something bad happens, and then it's just a vicious cycle that never ends, right? The need is collect telemetry, use different metrics, define those metrics, and proactively assign the training. Now the training should not be seen as a punishment to an employee, right? It should be formulated in such a way where it's actually where they take a message and they want to get trained so they can help to keep the organization more secure, right? I think that's the direction we
They feel more comfortable while getting those particular trainings rather than a punishment
correct
to them.
correct.
Right. We don't have any other questions in the chat box, or yeah. So to Laura, in your experience, what practical steps have actually helped transform security trainings from a compliance activity into something employees see as a real world practice?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, it starts from the tone at the top in terms of how the training is being communicated. The way that leadership phrases this is very important in terms of the criticality of it, the importance of it, the measurement of the effectiveness of it. So I think that's very key. Next would be the content, creating content that people can relate to. They feel like it is relevant for their jobs and they're actually learning something. I think they're much more likely to have meaningful impact from it. And the third, again, as we kind of talked about, is really creating those outcomes in a way that incentivize good behavior. So if you see a phishing email, it's not just, did you not click the link? It's also, did you report it to security? Like, are you taking the right behaviors based on that training, taking that risk-based awareness and changing your behavior accordingly, and being able to measure that throughout the organization, I think really starts to show the value that's being added there.
Yeah, that's